Hi everyone, my name is Mark Lucchini and I'm your host for today's webinar. Welcome to MATECHNet webinar, Grant Opportunities and Success Strategies. This webinar is brought to you by MATECH Networks, a member of the Academic and Student Affairs Division of Maricopa Community Colleges and the National Science Foundation. This webinar is being recorded and we will email you a link to the recording as soon as it is ready. I'd like to first by asking, if you are familiar with Illuminate, please raise your hand. Okay, we have a couple people who are, so for those of you who are not familiar, let me get you familiarized with it. This is the whiteboard. In the whiteboard, you will have all the slides showing up. The chat box, and this is just the chat box of the picture, is where you can type in your questions and comments. Be sure to send to this room so that everyone can follow the conversation. We'll take a few question and answer breaks throughout the webinar, but we encourage you to type your questions in the chat box promptly. I'll keep track of the questions so that we can address them during the breaks. If you have a technical issue, please send me a message in the chat box and I'll try to help you out. Now the chat box is really to the left of this picture, so it is to the left of this screen. So let's practice using the chat box right now. We'd like to know a little bit more about you, so in the chat box, type your organization's name and how many people are viewing this webinar with you. While you are typing in the chat box, I'd like to point out the participants box. The participants box is located right above the chat box. This is a list of everyone who's attending the webinar. You might notice colleagues, and it is okay to send them a personal note, but be aware that the moderator and presenters do see all comments typed into the chat box. Another way of interacting is by using polls. If you're asked to take a poll during the webinar, and you will be, there are 3 different polls, we'd like you to click on the letter buttons above the participants box. So if you look above the participants box, you'll see A, B, C, D, E. So from last semester, how many students are enrolled in your class or classes? So how many students were enrolled in your class or classes this last semester? And go ahead and hit A, B, C, D, or E. And I'll just give you a few moments. And while we're waiting for everybody else to do their type it in, I just want to point out real quick that we do have some nonverbal ways of communicating. We have a smiley face, a clap, a confused look, a thumbs down, and a hands going up. You can use any of these at any time in the presentation if you would like to let the presenter know that you like what you're hearing, or that you're enjoying yourself during the presentation, or you just want to applaud what they said. So let's just try this out real quick. If you're happy that it's Thursday and almost Friday, let's get a smiley face. If you're not happy the weekend's coming, give a thumbs down or a confused look. Great. We love participants' interaction. So just to let you know, one of the things we can do is publish the results of the statistics, and we will do that after each one. So it looks like we are ready to begin. Let me introduce you to Laura Smith, Project Manager for MATECH Networks. Laura, would you like to introduce our panelists today?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for attending this morning. Our presentation today is going to be on grant opportunities and success strategies. And one of the reasons why we're doing this is because community colleges are under increasing pressure today in terms of budgets, and yet they need to continue to innovate in areas of teaching and learning. External funding from federal, local, and foundation sources can enable colleges to continue to better serve their students, better support their faculty, and grow their programs to serve their communities. Today, our panelists bring 2 perspectives. Dr. Gerhard Salinger is the National Science Foundation Program Director. He will give us his view of important trends that can influence our approaches to seeking external funding. He will also report on what he sees as the expanding interest in programs for community colleges at the National Science Foundation. Catherine Crary is Maricopa Community College's Grant Development Specialist. She will give us a take on key elements of crafting successful proposals based on her multiple years of experience as a sponsored research officer at a large community college district. We encourage you to use the chat window for comments and questions throughout the webinar, as Mark just guided us to. And our presenters will also address final questions and comments at the end of the presentation. So feel free to keep your questions coming, and we will get to them as soon as we can. And now, Dr. Salinger. Dr. Salinger, as I mentioned, is the Program Director in the Division of Research on Learning in Formal and Informal Settings in the Directorate for Education and Human Resources at the National Science Foundation. In this position, he recommends the funding of proposals to develop and do research on nationally disseminated instructional materials and professional development of K-12 teachers supporting educational reform in mathematics, science, and technology education in K-12 classrooms. He has also been co-lead program director of the Advanced Technological Education Program since its inception in 1993. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Salinger by using the applause feature below the participants window. Gerhard?
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I think that the purpose of my talk is really to provide some background for rationale for proposals.
It's a little hard to hear you this morning, Gerhard.
I'm sorry. I'm not getting the slides either.
Okay, one moment.
Hold on just a second.
He has slide control, moderator control. So Gerhard, would you like us move the slides for you?
When I push on the button, nothing happens. I still have this panelist picture.
Okay. Oh, I see what the issue is. You're having, okay, there's we have a little bit of an issue with Illuminate going to his section right now. So what we can do is you can start speaking and we will move the slides, and then when you're able to, you'll be able to move the slides yourself as soon as the Illuminate gets caught up for you.
Okay, sorry everybody. So the idea is to raise some background issues that might guide the rationale for a proposal, especially for technicians and two-year colleges. On the first slide, I essentially make my usual disclaimer that I'm fully funded by the NSF. The ideas are mine and maybe not those of the NSF, but I'll try to keep that straight with you. Need the slides.
And we're at the objectives.
Okay, so the objectives of this talk are to really talk then about middle skill occupations, 21st century skills, report from the National Governors Association that talks about how to join forces in order to get more effect. And then I'll describe some parts of the Advanced Technological Education Program, some of its impacts to help guide you in the rationale, and then briefly mention a few other programs at the NSF that might be of interest. So, middle skill occupations are those that they're about 45% of all occupations, it turns out. 30% may be high skill, which usually means that use of abstraction. Then 20% are routine jobs that can't be offshored or computerized, such as construction or certified nursing assistants and retail clerks, so forth. The middle skill jobs are are those that require some post-secondary education, but not necessarily 4 years. They can be destinations as well as stepping stones. And it turns out that although many areas have pretty high employment, there still aren't enough people with the qualifications to fill many of these middle-skilled jobs. A year ago, I was in Michigan, a place of well-known unemployment, and yet there were something like 10,000 I'm getting okay. So that the
Gerhard, it sounds like you have your computer speakers on, so you'll need to mute your speakers.
I'm getting my voice back again.
Yes, you have your speakers on.
Oh.
Gerhard, you have your speakers on. You just need to mute your computer speakers again, please.
Thank you.
And it looks like that Illuminate has caught you back up, so you should have control of your slides again.
Okay, good. Sorry, everyone, for the technological issues. So in Michigan, there are 10,000 jobs, manufacturing jobs going on unfilled because there weren't people with the appropriate skills. So middle skill occupations, just to point out a few, are the science and engineering technicians, but not the engineers. They're first-line supervisors, inspectors, machinists. And industrial maintenance refers to the people who keep the assembly lines going, fix the robots or whatever, the programmable logic controllers, etc. My general belief is that, say, an office manager would be a middle-skilled job, and of course, may or may not be. NSF does not do medical technicians, leaving that to NIH. There are great job prospects that center on education. The workforce at Georgetown University estimates that there will be 7 million middle-skilled job openings. They will be filled by workers with an associate's degree or an occupational certificate. And the average income for many of these employees with the certificates is something of the order of $46,000, and that's more than 27% of the Bachelor of Arts degree holders. It's a very useful study called Pathways to Prosperity, put out actually by the Harvard Graduate School of Education at Harvard, that details more of this and what those jobs are. But concentrating then on middle-skilled jobs is one rationale for a proposal. Community colleges are ideal for educating students for middle-skilled jobs. They can provide the post-secondary education. And as many of you know, they maintain open access for post-secondary education, prepare students for transfer to four-year colleges and universities. And many of the community colleges now have the opportunity to provide 4 years of education, particularly for teachers, I think nurses, but some of them have gone broader than that. Community colleges also prepare students for the workplace and teaching them the 21st century skills, which we'll go into. And they provide non-credit courses which can help students needing some more background in order to be successful. The community colleges that we're working with also work very closely with industry so that they focus on the competencies that industry requires of technicians. And this is a fine line, and you want to, on one hand, maintain your educational integrity, at the same time provide the educational background that the technicians need. And getting decision makers from industry involved helps this. Provides flexible pathways for students. Students stop in, stop out. I think one of the issues that is giving legislators difficulty is that that many students aren't graduating, but they're succeeding in that they make their aim or meet their goals and aims, either for more education or for a job. One of the issues that we've run across is that industry, particularly human resource departments, really has a prejudice against two-year college graduates. They think that the four-year college students have the background and many of the other attributes, and so the community colleges need to work with the industries to point out that the two-year colleges can educate their workers. We're also looking for what we call T-shaped technicians. They have a depth in one or two areas, but a broad understanding of the job, including the 21st century skills and an idea of business. We certainly require that our projects lead to the technical competencies of students, and this again can be done by linking the colleges with the industries. One particular method that we become fond of is the backward design process of Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe. And they start with the suggestion that you first establish the learning goal, what it is that you want students to know and understand. And then to think about what will they look like if they really understand that. So that's assessment, but it's not only how you're going to get the data, but what would you expect students to know and be able to do. When you establish those two things, then and only then develop the activities to help the students reach the goal. Too much of our curriculum has been what I call neat things for kids to do that really don't go very far. So by first establishing the goal and the assessment, you keep your eyes on the goal and not on the activities. DACMS, developing a curriculum with the technicians and industry, really helps focus on what the technicians really need. But once you've developed the curriculum, it's also important to have the industry validate that that's what they wanted. As important as the technical skills are, the industry is the 21st century skills or professional skills or essential skills. I'm refraining from calling them soft skills because they're really very hard to teach. Industry cannot teach them. They need to be taught before. And talking to any group of industry people, they'll tell you, yes, we can teach the technical skills, but it's working in teams, the communications, oral and written, non-routine problem solving, adaptability, understanding business, and being either both entrepreneurial, also intrapreneurial. Intrapreneurial means seeing what needs to be done and going ahead and getting it done. These are the skills that people want. There's some objection perhaps to calling them 21st century skills. Plato knew about them. But since the last quarter of the last century, it's become everybody needs them, not only a few people. So I think that's what's really 21st century. One of the successful ways of teaching that in the AT, Advanced Technological Education program, has been problem-based learning. In its pure form, it's an industry, non-mission critical problem about which you build a course or part of a course. There are other forms of it, scenario-based learning or virtual enterprise system, all of which give the students a rather broader view. It brings the workplace into the classroom. It's not only the technical aspects, but all the rest of it as well. They certainly teach the 21st century skills, but again, you have to actually think about teaching than just putting people in groups. Does not teach teaming. And again, it's not a typical instruction. It turns out to be hard for the faculty in that the faculty doesn't know where the next question is coming from. It could be technical or non-technical. For the faculty don't really like to get involved in assessing the 21st century skills. It's also not traditional for the students who, I guess cynically say, the contract they have with the institution is you tell it to me, I may or may not think about it, and I'll tell it to you. This contract is badly violated by problem-based learning, where students have to come up with a new idea and continue to think about what they're doing. The National Governors Association Center for Best Practices developed a report on sharper focus on technical workers, really meant for governors. They used as their example the Advanced Manufacturing Technical Education Collaborative in Kentucky. It's about maintenance technicians, the people who keep the automotive assembly lines running. And it is, as you can see, partners with 30 community colleges in 12 states. It involves a lot of auto-related plants. At the meeting to put in the center, GM, Toyota, Ford, we're all there together, backing what was needed. And it's also connected to some other ATE centers, such as the CARCAM in Alabama, which is similar, and then the Center for Advanced Automotive Technology, which is more about alternative fuel vehicles, which is in Michigan. Their recommendations were for the governor or any group to champion technician education, to focus on a sector, and really probably one sector, that has major economic impact. Their recommendation was to use state funds to encourage the community college collaboration and innovation, and I would say this is where the Advanced Technological Education Program could also be very useful. I think we expect many of our projects to collaborate with other institutions and form the multi-state partnerships. The difficult part of this is the comprehensive outcome data. We've been struggling with this for many years and are only slowly, I think, making real progress on it. So this then brings us to other grant opportunities.
Gerhard, we have a question from the audience.
Yes.
About your recommendations. The question is, if I understand your recommendation, if I do all these things, such as focus on sectors that have major economic impact and use state funds to encourage community college collaboration, then will I be assured to get grant funding?
I think in grant funding nothing is assured, but I would say that important is to focus. Don't try to do all things. The typical project grant in the Advanced Technological Education Program is about $900,000 over 3 years. One of the difficulties is that people try to do too much, and then the reviewers look at it and say, well, they probably can't get all that done. So be very careful about figuring out what you can do, be very focused.
Okay, I see. On next slide, I'm going to take over for 1 second, Gerhard, and ask everyone this question. I'm going to give you all permission to draw on the whiteboard. And so if you could select the pen tool to the left of the slide area and put a check mark next to the programs, the National Science Foundation programs that you're familiar with. Let's see which programs are most popular or most well known, and then Dr. Salinger is going to go over some of the aspects of those programs in his presentation. Looks like ATE and STEM and STEP.
Yeah,
all right. Well, thank you, everyone. We can go ahead and continue. Gerhard, I'll give you back control over the whiteboard.
Okay. So I see a lot of people are already familiar with this program, but I think I'll cover some parts of it really, again, to continue to provide you rationale for projects that you want to fund. The ATE program is about educating, not training technicians, although we understand that there is overlap. But we want the technicians to have the background and so that if the processes and instruments change in the company, they can then be retrained very quickly. And we focus on technicians for high technology fields that are driving the economy. So that's the overall view of the program. Some technician occupations are shown here. Some you may not expect, like agriculture. We have one, precision agriculture. The energy-related technician are things that are coming up rather quickly. Alternative fuels, new processes, and then conservation is the sustainability. Things like building maintenance technicians. In information systems, we have things like the GIS, GPS, cybersecurity, and then more of the information systems and the information technology, one being more about the system, the other is about what's on the system. Mechatronics seems to be an area now that is going, which is mechanics, electronics, computing all combined. Just talking to people about one in logistics, which was kind of warehouse management, which is really programmable logic controllers and sensing devices. The budget is presently about $64 million. We received an order of 275 proposals and are able to fund about 25% of them. In the future, and I'll bring this up again, it's expected that there'll be more emphasis on community colleges in some of the other programs, both in undergraduate, well, mostly in undergraduate education, and for our programs for broadening participation. We have three types of projects, centers, and then small projects and targeted educational research. We're really quite interested in learning more about good practices in technician education. The types of activities I show here could be program improvement, developing courses, professional development, developing curriculum materials. We are looking at preparation for teachers, technical teachers, and the research. A particular project should probably only do one of these, or a little bit more maybe. The center could do more than this, and we're really looking for them, particularly the national centers, to have strong interactions with the industry and work together with the regional centers and the projects in order to bring all these activities together and lessen duplication and more interaction. The ATE program is amazingly interactive. We have an annual survey, and here are some things that we look at: the number of students, faculty. You can see rather the faculty. There's quite a number of secondary school students, teachers that come in. Articulation agreements. This is not primarily an articulation program, particularly with four-year schools, but we don't want things to be dead-ended. And the partnerships with the business and industry are not only monetary partnerships or financial help, but we really ask for the idea to have intellectual partnerships with the industry. So one of our centers is quit calling them business advisory councils and wants to call them industrial leadership council, to really point out what we expect from the industry. In addition to that, we've been doing some surveying and trying to find out what has been the impact. And there are four of these: the impact on students who now understand the workplace, have a broader base of applicable technical and professional skills. There's more, we've mentioned several times, a connection to what industry requires. It addresses national skill standards. Industry coming in gives the students with some contact with industry, and the possibilities of internships. they've been notoriously difficult, but I think industry is seeing more and more that they also get a chance to look at somebody before hiring them. The faculty in the community colleges change as a result of these projects. They think of their job as much more than teaching. They begin to serve on local, regional, and even national committees. They have more contacts within the industry. And then at our annual Principal Investigators meeting, they network with people with similar interests. The community colleges also change. Their services for grant writing and processing generally increase. There are more connections between the colleges, high schools, and four-year institutions. There's much more industry interest. And they begin to get more attention from state agencies and professional societies that attracts other grants and funding. So there's an impact on the college reputation as well. And then the community sees economic development or industry coming because of good programs. School reputation goes up. And there's then a network between colleges. We have several project centers where a group of colleges in a region or in a state begin to work together. This has caused some issues because they're used to being apart, and now they're beginning to collaborate. And there are issues in that need to be worked out. So I just want to mention a few other programs that we have, one being the Information Technology Experiences for Students and Teachers. This is in the Division of Research on Learning. And the idea is really it could be in school or out of school. And the idea is to make students aware of the workplace. And so teaching of 21st century skills and some career awareness is important. It can be done with students and or teachers in or out of school. And it's sort of a complement to some of the technician education programs. This is an H-1B visa-funded program, that is, companies that want to hire foreign nationals to do various work have to pay for the visas, and that money is kept separate. And the STEM program is also a H-1B visa program. It's really scholarships in science, technology, engineering, and math for academically and financially needy students. And these are proposed by the college and then can be used to help students achieve technician education. Many of our ATE grantees have STEM. The STEP program, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math Talent Expansion Program, really seeks to increase the number of students in STEM fields, and here's an opportunity for community colleges and four-year schools to work together.
Gerhard, if I can interrupt. You mentioned that with some of these programs, we'll be competing against four-year colleges and universities. Do you have any advice for us?
Yeah, these, as I've mentioned so far, really, I think the two-year colleges are really quite competitive. Let me just go to the NOIS program, which is really about preparation of teachers, and again finds scholarships and stipends for STEM majors to become teachers. And it also looks at those who are career changers. In other programs like the TWOS program, Transforming Undergraduate Education in STEM, you're competing against four-year colleges. And I've come to see that there are three really major parts of a proposal. One is it has to have a really creative idea. And two, it has to demonstrate the capacity to carry that idea out. And three, it just has to be well written. And it's two where I see the most difficulty, because the four-year colleges very often, or four-year university, have resources and access to personnel that sometimes community colleges do not. So you need to pick a problem for which you're the expert. and technician education. That's where the two-year colleges are the experts. But joining together very often in our research on technician education, we're asking four-year college people who have the educational research methodology to work with the two-year colleges who know what questions to ask. So it's working together.
Thank you.
So overall, what I did was to try to review these objectives, to define the middle skill jobs and point out they really are the majority of all jobs, and they do lead to careers on which you can have a quite reasonable lifestyle. But the 21st century skills are going to be more and more important and are already important. The Governors Association says it's useful if you work together and try to make an economic impact on the region, and then the impacts of the technological education program on students, faculty, the community college, and the community are useful things to look at. And then mentioned a few other programs at NSF. There is a conference coming up, which is, I think, invitation only, but again, bringing people together to see about broadening the impact of two-year colleges on NSF programs. And it should have a report, or it'll show up in the program solicitation. The Evaluate Center for the ATE program has a webinar on July 20th on stronger evaluation plans. Mike Lasecki, who helped set this conference up as a principal investigator, Narina Badway as an evaluator, and Liz Tellis, who was also co-lead of the ATE program until her retirement a couple of years ago, are presenting. That might interest you. I list here some resources, and I think they will, if we can get them. These are resources for the ATE program that tell you a lot about it. Teachingtechnicians.org is really a list of professional development opportunities. And so with that, I'll thank you and for your attention, and up to Laura whether I take questions or whether we go on.
Thank you. Let's give Dr. Selinger a round of applause. And if you have any questions for him, go ahead and type them into the chat box. We can take a couple questions before we move on to Catherine Crary. All right. So I see a question that says, I work at a technical high school that has articulation agreements with our local community colleges. Any recommendations for us in trying to initiate a collaborative grant to include our high school students in preparing them for the workforce?
Yeah, I think, I guess I got this a slightly different way. Most of the proposals, we say that community college faculty have to be in leadership positions in the proposals. And usually we do get proposals from four-year institutions, and some of them fail because they don't have sufficient community college faculty involved, and the reviewers follow the money. On the other hand, two-year colleges have often, we've found, said they will do things with the high schools without a similar sort of treatment. So working together would be a good idea. We don't fund projects that are totally local. We're looking for projects that then can change the way other technical colleges, the high schools and community colleges work together.
Okay, thank you. We have an attendee from Bulgaria today, and they asked, are there programs for cooperation in this topics between U.S. and other countries?
The National Science Foundation, first of all, is national, but it does have an Office of International Science and Engineering. The general gist has been that the National Science Foundation, in a collaborative project, would fund the U.S. people, and the other country would have to fund whatever is done by the people from the other country. The Office of International Science and Engineering did come to us last year with some money, saying they wanted to develop 6 weeks or so abroad for technicians, and we have 5 such programs going on where the technicians interacted some via the internet, and then are going to the other country to see how technician education works, to work on projects, and also to see what it's like to be part of a global company in its foreign, a global company, but in its foreign part.
Okay, thank you. Now we will have another opportunity to ask Dr. Salinger questions again at the end of the webinar, so if you'd like to type them into the chat box anytime, that will be fine. We're going to thank him again, and now we will have Catherine Crary, who will get into more detail and elaborate on proposal development. Catherine is a Grants Development Specialist for the District Grants Development and Management Department at the Maricopa Community Colleges. She has 13 years of experience in higher education and within the area of resource development, all within the area of resource development. In addition, she serves as a member of the Council for Resource Development Leadership. Let's welcome Catherine with a round of applause. Catherine, when you're ready, go ahead.
Thank you, and what great information, Gerhard. Thank you for sharing it with us. I hope you all have found a funding opportunity that interests you, and now we're going to talk about discussing strategies for you to successfully plan, develop, and submit that grant proposal. We have 3 objectives for today's discussion, and by the end of this section, you should be able to state 6 components to planning a proposal, state 6 components to developing a proposal, and state 4 tips to working with your sponsored research office. Let's take a quick poll. What is the most common mistake SROs see with individuals developing proposals?
Catherine, I think we had you drop off.
Oh, I'm still here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're fine.
Okay, so if you could select A, B, C, or D on the poll, and then Mark will display those results in just a moment.
I'll give you 10 more seconds to fill in A, B, C, D.
We have some experienced folks in the audience, I see. Surprisingly, as it may be for the 44% of you who did not respond, the answer is C. The proposal does not respond to guidelines. The guidelines are very important to follow, but what happens on occasion is you get so wrapped up in trying to describe your idea that the guidelines almost become secondary, and so you kind of forget about that piece and start typing up everything that you want the reviewers to share. So it's important to follow the guidelines, and since it's such an important issue, you'll see that it comes up a couple times during the presentation, and I think it's a great place to start. So strategy 1 involves planning. In order to develop a strong proposal, it must be planned well. It's often stated that about 2/3 of a proposal is in planning, and 1/3 of that time is spent on development. And it's really important to begin the planning early because it never fails. You can never have enough time. Sometimes we just kind of get wrapped up on, oh, we'll get this done next week, but time can easily escape you, and we want to make sure that you allow enough time for planning so that your proposal can be developed well. It's also important to understand that when I use the word guidelines, I also mean solicitations, RFPs, or any other document that a funding agency puts out when they want to solicit grant proposals. Be sure to start by reading the entire set of guidelines and understand everything that's in there. If there's some components that don't make sense or you would like further clarification on, it's always important to go ahead and email or call the program officer to get some clarification on that. Since the reason why this is so important, you need to have a good grasp of what the agency wants. It's important to use highlighters, Post-its, colored pens, or anything else you can think of to highlight the important parts of the guidelines. I occasionally will write main points in the margins so it's easy to reference them later on. Do your homework. Be sure to do some research. Once you identified your idea, you want to be sure to begin researching it to make sure that you see what's been done before in regards to the topic, and to use the research to support your methodology. Build your idea on prior work or best practices. When developing an NSF proposal, look at the prior award section of the NSF website. If you find a topic that's similar to what you are going to be developing your proposal on, try to contact the principal investigator of the project. Discuss what their project was about, and if it's appropriate, go ahead and request the final project report. Within the proposal, discuss what is different about your project and what your project builds on. There may be some information they discovered during their grant that is going to help you to guide your project possibly in a different direction. By providing adequate support of your research to support your idea, community colleges and universities are able to compete on the same level. Another idea is to email the program officer listed in the solicitation who is within the same discipline area as your project. They will usually listen to your idea and provide some feedback. Third, talk to your sponsored research office, and do this early on in the process. By talking with an individual from your SRO, you will make them aware of your interest in submitting a grant sometime in the next future. It is a good idea to ask them what steps you'll need to follow. It's also helpful to know how soon you need to get them a draft, if there's certain signatures that you need to obtain before you submit this draft. And in addition, they may be able to provide you with some additional hints to developing your proposal. They may have sample proposals or sections of proposals that they can share with you. They may even have reviewer comments from prior competitions that they can share and use those to your advantage. You can take a look and see, okay, there's this TWO's proposal, and last year it had these things wrong with it, and let's make sure that my proposal now addresses all of those. Each SRO is different, so it's important not to assume that each office is going to provide the same amount of support and services. An SRO tip is to develop a writing outline or a checklist. It's much easier to focus on, let's say, 1 or 2 pages of information that you need to respond to, rather than 15 or 80 pages of a program solicitation. It's also important to begin budget discussions early. Nothing is worse than planning and developing your whole entire proposal and then working on the budget last, only to discover that you have a $2.5 million project and you can only ask for $500,000. You know, this may sound silly, but on occasion it does happen. It's because the money can get spent so quickly. You can spend $2.5 million in 5 minutes easy. The budget categories that tend to add up fast are the personnel area, contracts for consultants or subgrants, as well as indirect costs. In the planning stages, which is what we're in right now, it's okay if you estimate the expenses. But it's just good to kind of estimate what all of those expenses are going to be now so that you can make sure that you're not planning that $2.5 million proposal when you can only ask for the $500,000. You can use the NSF budget template, which is in the handout, to figure out what budget categories you need to answer. That way you make sure you're not leaving anything out. And don't forget to estimate some costs for the evaluator and indirect costs which we're going to be discussing shortly. Discussing in the evaluation, dissemination, and the sustainability sections during the planning stages can help shape the main idea. For example, when you start conversations on dissemination, they can lead you down conversations of whether or not the proposal is innovative, whether it can contribute to the STEM education. It's also appropriate to consider, how will others learn from your project? How and when will the information be shared? During conversations about the evaluation, they may begin to discuss ways to assess participant learning, and then lead to the need to include a workshop, including student pre- and post-test assessments. In addition, it ensures that your proposal has measurable objectives. And a conversation about sustainability, it's important to keep in mind, how will this project be institutionalized after funding runs out? Will the grant continue in a similar fashion? Will it cease? Will research continue? Will it carry on in a smaller scale? While we are in the planning stages, so not a lot of time needs to be spent on it, it's certainly helpful to at least begin the discussion. Including partners in the planning process is also important. They don't have to be involved in every planning meeting, but at least involved in the major discussions. Your collaborators or partners have the potential to expand your idea further than you may have ever thought. They may identify ways to adapt your proposal, what they can bring to the table, because everybody has something to bring to the table. And collaborators will bring their experience and their connections, which can lead to a stronger proposal.
Catherine, we have a question real quick, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Could you explain what an SRO is, please?
Yes, an SRO is a sponsored research office. And that also is called a grants office. It can also be called institutional research offices. Every institution, college, or university places this quote-unquote SRO office in different areas. So it's helpful to find out who does quote-unquote your grants out of your college. Talk around the folks, contact maybe some of the institutional research to find out, does your campus have an SRO office? And if so, how do you get in touch with them?
Thank you, Catherine. I'll let you continue.
You're welcome. All right, we'll go ahead and start with strategy 2, which is the development stage. Now that you've planned your proposal over the past few weeks, maybe even months, you can describe all of those ideas into your narrative. Remember to follow the guidelines and your agency handbooks. Yes, we did mention guidelines in the planning strategy, but I want to add emphasis to this since it tends to get overlooked. If you have developed a writing outline, you would begin by following your narrative and kind of filling in the blanks. But if you haven't developed a writing outline or a checklist, then you're going to go ahead and start writing your proposal, but ensuring that you're following the agency-specific handbooks. For example, the National Science Foundation has what is called a grant proposal guide. In this grant proposal guide, it tells you additional details about proposal formatting and description of required components that may not be addressed in the guidelines. They could talk about the proposal must be in 1-inch margins, 11 or 12-point font, single spacing, all important things to know when developing your proposal. They may even talk about attachments such as the NSF data management plan. Those are required for any NSF proposals as of January. So if you don't read that agency handbook to see that that grant data management plan is required, your proposal may be in jeopardy of not being reviewed. Each agency has a different and possibly unique handbook or guidebook, so be sure to look at the guidelines and find out what each of those are. To illustrate this, I'd like to share an example of a recent experience that took place on a proposal submission. There was an individual who developed a really strong grant proposal and looked excellent, ready for competition. However, when it came to our office, we realized that not all the agency guidelines were followed. Some of the font size requirements, the margin requirements, or spacing requirements were not quite followed throughout consistently. So we took a look at the proposal guidelines and adjusted it to the guideline requirements and noticed, oops, it's over by 13 pages. Thankfully, we had enough time to work with the developer to fix everything and submitted the proposal in accordance with the guidelines. However, you may not always have that extra time. So it's really important to follow those guidelines. You don't want to have your proposal kicked out of the competition during the compliance stage. Laura, I see that there might be a question.
I do. Catherine, I've heard you say this before, and other people say it, and I'm not sure if it's a myth, and maybe Gerhard could shed some light on this as well. But is it true that when the NSF or other organizations receive proposals that have strict guidelines like that as far as font and margins, do they really take a ruler and measure those things to see if the proposal is qualified to be reviewed?
I'll go ahead and start from my experience. I have heard from program officers at different funding agencies, not just NSF. So maybe Gerhard can provide the insight from NSF's point. But I know, for example, the U.S. Department of Education, unfortunately that is someone's role, that they sit there with a ruler, make sure that your margins are in, they make sure that your font sizes are within the right areas, and they do all that as soon as the proposals come into them and before they go off to reviewers. So there's the potential that, say you're using a half of a point of a margin and 1 inch is required, your proposal goes straight to the trash and never gets reviewed.
Wow.
Gerhard, do you have a different take on that?
No, no, that's pretty much correct. People don't do maybe not exact measurements on margins and fonts, but they are checked on. And I guess I would go further and say, particularly with respect to font, even though NSF says 10-point type, I was at a place where the reviewers said their 50-year-old eyes can't read less than 12-point type. So conservation of reviewers is a good thing to think about.
I see. Well, I see why you stress those guidelines. I'll let you continue with your presentation. Thank you both.
You're welcome. Good question. Now, when you're developing your proposal narrative, you're going to want to make sure that you describe everything in detail. One of the weaknesses that NSF has cited for proposals is that they didn't include enough detail. While NSF has gone on record and said this during presentations, I can speak from experience that it does happen. Sometimes we need to be a little bit strategic on how we're going to include the information, such as putting information in graphics or charts, possibly even tables, to provide the insight into what the proposal will complete in a quick, easy to manage fashion for the reviewers. Be sure to take advantage of all of the pages allotted. A reviewer will be able to have a full understanding of the project if you do this. A way to test if you have a full, well-written proposal is when one of your colleagues can pick up the proposal, take a look at it, read it, and then tell you everything that's going to happen on that proposal. And if you notice when that takes place, that if they're missing some holes in what you thought was described, go ahead and follow up with some questions and say, hey, did you understand this part? And it may be an area that you need to improve on. On occasion, proposals are submitted to our office with not utilizing the maximum number of pages. So what we do is begin to ask probing questions to the individual developing it. It starts to bring a lot more detail to the surface, at which point they go back, review, revise, and add that detailed information. Trust me, it's really a lot easier to go back and delete a page or two after you're done writing than have to go back and add more and more and more or not give enough detail to that program officer. or the reviewers reviewing those proposals. Be sure your proposal includes at least one goal, some objectives, and some activities. Make sure the objectives are measurable, ambitious, yet still achievable. In including these items in the proposal, it provides a clear direction and purpose. They also come in really handy when you're developing that evaluation plan. When developing your objectives, it's best to base them on data to ensure that you're not being too ambitious. In order to do this, you may need to work with your institutional research office or someone within your department to obtain the figures. Your proposal will be much stronger for including the figures, and you're going to be able to meet or exceed the objective rather than falling far short. For example, if your college has a 20% retention rate from one course to the other, it's usually way too ambitious to state we're going to increase it up to 100% due to this grant. What may be more achievable, since you have that 20% figure, to state that it's 30 or 40% retention rate increase due to the proposal. Now we're going to take another poll question. Please identify which of the following is an objective. Is it A, B, or C? Or take a few moments for you to respond, and we'll have the poll placed afterwards.
And just a reminder, the A, B, and C are located just above the participants box. And we'll give you 10 more seconds.
It might be easier to identify the objective as opposed to writing one, Catherine.
It will be. I see we have some experienced folks attending. Yes, the answer is B. By spring 2013, 85% of project participants will complete a CNC machinist certificate. A is actually a goal, and C is actually an activity. The reason why you'll see that the objective on there is stated as is because it's SMART, what we call specific, measurable, achievable, related to a purpose, and it's time-bound. Just to refresh your memory in case you have forgotten, a goal is a concise statement of the project purpose. Objectives are specific, measurable, and quantifiable outcomes to be achieved by the project, and activities are the actions taken to accomplish each of those objectives. Let's continue on talking about development. In the proposal, you will describe the project team. When NSF proposals include resumes or biosketches, it is still important to provide some highlights within the proposal that discuss why the team qualified. Be sure to provide this detail because the reviewers don't know this individual from Adam. They may be the most brilliant person on your campus, but the reviewers aren't going to know that. So briefly describe their background as it relates to the proposal. And if you're trying something new, possibly doing a pilot test during the proposal, and so the project personnel don't have the specific experience in carrying this out, be sure to describe some type of experience as it relates to other components of the proposal so that reviewers have a full understanding that these people are qualified to do what you say that they're going to be doing. You also want to describe the collaborators' roles and responsibilities also. You're going to briefly discuss them, but it's important to discuss them because they need to know what they'll also be doing, and you're going to be supporting it by a letter of commitment. Include a strong evaluation plan. This typically includes formative evaluations that lead to stronger outcomes since the proposal is receiving regular feedback and adjusting their plan as appropriate. Now this section is usually difficult for even an experienced writer to develop. So it's okay to identify an evaluator who has the experience that you need and have them develop this section of the proposal. The evaluator usually develops this at no cost. However, if your campus has some policies against practices like this, it's okay to either have them pay for them to develop the section or work with your institutional research office to develop it. In addition, the internet can be a great resource. Your handout lists a few of these resources, one of those even including a video on how to develop evaluations. Evaluation plans are becoming increasingly important these days, especially in the trend of transparency. Laura, I see that there might be a question.
Yes, we have a question, Catherine. Could you explain to us briefly the difference between a summative and formative evaluation?
Yes. A formative evaluation takes place on a regular basis. The summative evaluation summarizes everything that took place.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Developing the budget is often difficult also. As I said earlier, the totals can add up really fast. It's often appropriate to work with someone who has experience in developing your departmental budgets, or they work with the figures on a regular basis. This could be a manager, an administrative assistant, maybe a grant accountant, or even someone in your own SRO. Identify all the costs related for reassigned time, hiring an adjunct, replacement cost. You should also include costs for an evaluator. And this is going to appear in the consultant line since they are independent from the project. It's not unusual to budget about 10% of your grant funds for the evaluator. What is not acceptable is to include unexplained cost, unallowable cost, or even slush funds, just to make sure you have everything you need. Certainly do not do these. Make sure everything has a purpose. A tip that I often give to folks is to place a dollar sign, read through the entire proposal, and place a dollar sign in the margins. And then go back, look at each of those dollar signs, and start to ask yourself questions such as, are we going to need to include costs for this? Will the college be picking it up? Or do we need to have someone else pick it up? For example, if a proposal starts to describe a website, and at this website, project participants are going to be getting information on announcements, registration. They'll be able to refer to handouts. This would be a great spot to put in that dollar sign. And then ask yourself, will the grant need to pay for a developer to develop this website? Will it need a server? Who's going to maintain it? All those are appropriate questions to ask while developing your budget. And if you don't know the answers for these right offhand, work with your team to get those answers. Be sure that all funds requested support your grant goals and your objectives. Keeping the agency guidelines and handbooks is an important detail here. NSF grants, in their GPG, that grant proposal guide, they state that if an individual is playing a role in the project and not getting paid, you cannot include any of their time on forums, as it may be considered cost sharing and your proposal may get kicked out. You can read more about this in the grant proposal guide, but it's just an example of why it's important to keep those handbooks and guidelines in mind the entire time you're developing a grant. An SRO tip is to know what your institution's indirect cost rate is. When I say indirect costs, they're the costs that are incurred to conduct the normal business activities of an organization, and they cannot be directly charged or identified with a specific cost of this activity. Sometimes this cost can be expensive. Some institutions have an indirect cost rate of 53% of total direct costs, which means if you're submitting a $100,000 grant, potentially 53% of that is going to be going for the indirect costs. Some institutions have a rate of 50% of salaries and wages, so it will be much less. For more detail about that, I encourage you to talk to your SRO, and they can answer any questions, as each institution is a bit different. Let's talk about strategy 3, the submission. It's not always as easy as one would think of just hitting a submit button. Before you submit, it's really important to review the proposal from the mindset of a reviewer. Scrutinize everything. Your reviewer may be reviewing up to 15 or 20 proposals depending on the agency, and you really want to make sure that yours stands out. A few helpful questions that I always ask is there a need? Why should this proposal be funded? Who and how many people will be affected by this grant? Do they have a solid evaluation plan? Your proposal really needs to stand out, so be sure that you're providing all the criteria requested in that solicitation. After you review your own proposal, and if you're open to feedback, I would encourage someone to have 2 more reviews completed. One could be from a content expert, and the other can be from an individual who doesn't know anything about the project. The person who doesn't know anything about the project can be really helpful to point out unknown acronyms, or if a part of the proposal doesn't make sense because it starts to go into the discipline in great detail. And this person who may not know something from the discipline area can be a representative from your SRO. You never know the experiences that the reviewers will have, so it's best to not rely on that everybody knows everything that you want them to. And please only ask others to review your proposal if you're serious about the feedback. This doesn't mean that you have to include all of the recommended changes, but please take their comments seriously. Don't expect them to say it's going to be perfect. Strategy 2, the proposal narrative and the budget are not the only pieces of the proposal. The proposal may contain certifications and other attachments. Talking to your SRO office early on in the process will identify who is going to complete these forms. And do you need to obtain additional signatures? Are there official signatures that need to be faxed in after the fact? Here's an example of the documents that NSF requests for a proposal, that it's beyond that narrative and budget. On the NSF application package, you'll see there's a cover sheet, project data forms, project summaries, all of these items. So it's not as simple as uploading that budget and the narrative. And in that cover sheet, it's even more expansive because it'll say that there's details about the college, where you're located, who's going to be working on the project. There's also something called the Human Subjects Review information. This is referred to the IRB. Please note that you don't have to have the IRB approval before you submit the proposal, but it is required before awards are made. There are also 9 other various certifications that your SRO office looks at each time to verify that they are being completed. The SRO office is usually the individual who submits the proposal. They are often referred to as the authorized representative for the institution. They verify that all the documents and attachments are included, and that it has all the approvals necessary. Know that they need time to do this. It's not a simple 5-minute and the click of the button. So it's important, as we said earlier, to have that conversation with the SRO to make sure you allow for enough time for them to do these additional reviews. And then after they submit the proposal, you have typically a 6-month wait time before you hear anything back from a funding agency on whether it's funded or not. An SRO tip is grants.gov proposals are encouraged to submit 48 to 72 hours before the deadline to ensure that it passes all of the validation checks that it needs. Strategy 4 is post-submission. Now you've submitted the proposal, you've waited 6 months, and now you're going to hear back from a program officer. If it's funded, congratulations. You've developed a strong proposal that received great reviews from the funding agency. Now, what I always suggest is sit down, reread the proposal, familiarize yourself with what you said you would do and how you were going to do it, and use that proposal as your guide to run your project successfully. If you receive the unfortunate news that your proposal is not funded, please don't get discouraged. Some agencies have as low as a 1% success rate for proposals being funded. It's important to read the reviewer comments that you received back on your proposal and begin to reshape your proposal based on the feedback and get it ready to submit the next year. Also, if there's some comments, reviewer comments that you don't understand, go ahead and call the program officer to discuss them in more detail. And through the Freedom of Information Act, you can usually request to see the top 3 or 4 funded proposals from each competition. Each agency has their own timeline, so this may be 2 weeks, it may be 6 months. So be sure to ask for them as soon as you receive your feedback so you have time to look at those model proposals and reshape yours if needed. In my experience, if you look at the reviewer comments and you do everything else we just stated, it can often lead to an even stronger proposal. And during the next competition, it may get funded. I've even had the experience of working with a couple of faculty members who tried 3 or 4 times before the proposal gets funded. This is usually when the success rates are low, about a 9% or so. Each year they reshaped the proposal, provided new feedback, integrated new research as it became available, recalculated the budget, and resubmitted. Eventually, it led to a strong funded proposal. Victory is always sweet. An SRO tip is to serve as a reviewer. NSF often states the benefits including knowledge of review process, common problems with proposal. You'll also notice the strategies to develop a stronger proposal and meet with colleagues and other NSF program officers. Tips for submitting NSF-specific proposals. I'll let you read them and you'll have them on your slides. But ask yourself the following questions. There's 3 on this page and 3 on this next slide. The first bullet refers to women and minorities, since they are typically considered an underrepresented group in the STEM field, which is NSF's area. So you need to kind of ask yourself, does your proposal include these special populations? Does it recruit them if it's appropriate? So let's review our objectives. 6 components to planning a proposal. This is what you have learned today. Read and understand the guidelines. Do your homework. Provide some research. Talk to your SRO. Begin budget discussions early. Discuss evaluation, dissemination, sustainability, and include your partners in the planning process. 6 components to developing a proposal. Remember to look at the guidelines. Follow the agency handbooks also. Describe the proposal in detail. Include goals, objectives, and activities. Describe the project team, including your collaborators. Include a strong evaluation plan. And developing the budget is often difficult, so start early. 4 tips that you've learned to working with your SRO is to develop a writing outline, know your institution's indirect cost rate, submit grants.gov proposals 48 to 72 hours early, and serve as a reviewer. A closing thought that I would like to share with you is to think big and to have fun when developing your proposal. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at the information provided.
Thank you, Catherine. Let's give Catherine a great round of applause. Now at this time, if you have any final questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box. We're going to turn back over to Mark Vicani, our host, and he is going to provide you with some other valuable information. Mark?
Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.
So go ahead and type in any questions that you have, and we'll answer those. But what I'd like to do right now is your feedback is invaluable to help us improve our webinars. We'd also like your input on the topics to feature in future webinars. This will take about a minute to complete. So I'm going to put up a survey, and I'm going to ask you to please fill it out. And then when you get done filling out, please type your questions into the chat box.
Okay, and while everyone is taking the survey, I do have some questions already from our participants for Catherine and Gerhard, so I'm going to ask those while you're taking the survey. The first question is, when submitting a proposal, is there any follow-up with the reviewer prior to complete rejection? Let's go to Gerhard for that question.
In general, the awards are negotiated. If it's going to be a declination, it's usually not negotiated, but you get all the reviews unattributed, the panel summary, and often program officer comments. And after you've digested those, usually sleep on them a little and then digest them, you can certainly call up the program officer and get more information.
Thank you. And the second question is very similar, and you touched on it. Is it typical to get questions about your proposal before a funding decision is made? And if that happens, when does that process occur?
For awards, almost everyone is, I'd say, negotiated. NSF has a goal of 70% of the actions done within 6 months of the submission of the proposal or the due date. Program officers are, I think, badly overworked, and maybe a little longer rather than shorter, but certainly if you're getting a award, you'll have a telephone call or an email.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. I'm sorry, go ahead, Gerhard.
I was just going to raise one back on that several people ask about becoming reviewers, and you gave them a website. I find it really helpful if somebody else sends in the application. If your dean or department chair sends it in, I assume the message is, this is somebody I would like to have review my proposal if there were no conflicts of interest.
Are there any qualifications for becoming a reviewer?
Most reviewers need to have the technical background and no two-year colleges. We like people from industry, from secondary schools, 4-year institutions. And you send in a resume, and we look for various kinds of expertise.
Okay. Thank you. We have another question. If an objective is very ambitious, is it still achievable? And could it be rejected if a reviewer deemed an objective as not achievable?
Well, from the NSF point of view, I think Department of Education, many of the other agencies use points. Points for this, points for that. NSF is like grading a student, A, B, C, D, and F.
Mm-hmm.
And so any individual issue is not enough to, well, it depends, but the people look at the whole proposal and look at all the issues and then give it a rating. So you might have an unachievable or somewhat unachievable objective, but other things look good, then the program officer will negotiate that point.
Okay, thank you. And I believe we have... Yes.
Can I touch on that also?
Yes, please.
It's important to provide the baseline information because, like Gerhard mentioned, the U.S. Department of Education and some other groups, other agencies, do look at that, and if you provide that baseline information somewhere in your proposal, they'll be able to tell, yes, it is ambitious, and yes, it's achievable. If you're stating that your current rate of, like I mentioned, retention rate is 20%, and you state that you're going from 100 down to, it provides an area for them to figure out, is this ambitious, is this attainable? And so they may look at your proposal differently if they deem it as not ambitious or attainable at all.
Thank you. We have another question regarding faculty. Would you say that faculty are a help or a hindrance in the grant development is the question. And I think what the questioner means is, how can a grant developer best work with faculty? Well,
go ahead, Kat.
Okay. From an SRO's office point of view, I would mention that they're critical. In some agencies, an SRO is able to develop their proposal alongside of the faculty member. But I would state with NSF proposals that it's really important for the faculty member to be developing the proposal and having the SRO sit on the sidelines, because they both bring valuable information to the table. The faculty member brings their expertise in the areas of that discipline, the grant discipline, and the SRO member brings their expertise of grant development. So if they can work collaboratively on every proposal, their success rates are going to be increasing.
Thank you, Catherine. Gerhard, did you want to briefly comment on that as well?
Well, I totally agree. There are also groups of people called grant writers, and I don't know whether they work, some of them may work through SROs, but others may be independent. But the ideas have to be the faculty. The grant writer might be able to state them better or make a neater proposal, but the ideas have to come from the faculty.
Okay, thank you. Now for the $1 million question. Let's say that we were developing a $1 million grant. How much time and resources should we set aside to develop a $1 million grant?
Well, I have a ballpark figure, and I'm not sure. It depends on how much money is in the grant, but my belief is it costs roughly $30,000 to submit a proposal to NSF. I mean, that's counting people's time and so forth. And it's, I don't think the number is 50,000 or 10,000, but you can argue about them in the details. And I think that's something you want to think about, is that are you willing to spend $30,000 to get this idea submitted?
Thank you, Gerhard. We're going to go ahead and turn back over to Mark. He's going to provide us with some other opportunities, and we'll still have a couple questions at the end of the presentation if time allows. So Mark, go ahead.
All right, thank you. We're going to turn off the survey, so if you haven't filled it in, please hit submit. I'll give you 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'd like to say, if you can attend one conference this year, we highly recommend the High Impact Technology Exchange Conference. High-Tech is the venue of choice for community and technical college educators and stakeholders seeking professional development opportunities, educational materials, and collaborative ventures, and insights into emerging marketing trends to develop and advance the technical workforce of the 21st century. Join us in San Francisco, July 25th through the 28th. High-Tech will feature 17 workshops, 3 industry tours, 60+ breakout sessions, a technology showcase, and invaluable networking opportunities. For more information, visit highimpact.org. This webinar has been recorded, and there are webinar recording slides and handouts. All you have to do is go to maytechnetworks.org, keyword search webinar grant opportunities. The webinar and slides will be available later this afternoon. The handout is available right now. Join us for our upcoming webinar, June 16th, the Master Series, Multimedia Literacy. Visit maytechnetworks.org and click Professional Growth tab for more information and to register. If you'd like a certificate of participation, you may email Sally Clausen if you attended the live version of this 1.5 hour. And I'm going to thank you right now for attending Grant Opportunities and Success Strategies. Visit Maytech Networks for Digital Resource Library, Techspectives blogs, and webinars. And if Gerhard and Catherine and Laura are willing to stay on, they can answer a few more questions for you.
We want to thank our presenters. Let's give them another round of applause. They did an excellent job today. Thank you, Gerhard and Catherine. Gerhard, do you have any closing comments?
I'm not sure. I'm trying to think of something pithy to say, but I'm not sure that a lot has been covered.
Okay. You recommended the Evaluate webinar coming up, and I know you're a big supporter of the High Impact Technology Exchange Conference. Would you encourage people to attend both of those?
Yes, they're very different, and the High Tech Conference really is a conference on technician education, which is broader than ATE, and there's a lot of more technical talks there. I think that would be useful. So I think I would reiterate Catherine's comment about when you get your proposal written early enough so that some of your friends and not so friends can read over it and give you advice.
Thank you. And Catherine, do you have a final word that you'd like to leave us with today?
I would just say kind of hang in there. It's going to be a new awkward experience when you're developing it for the first time. You may say, I don't need to understand why we need 15 pages. I can say what I want to say in 2. Just kind of work with your SRO. Take the tips that Gerhard shared, take the tips that we shared today, and kind of work on your proposal and work with your SRO and truly just have fun. Put your best ideas out there. The worst that's going to happen is they're going to say no, but we would like you to reapply again next year, and here's the comments we want you to address.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Gerhard, and thank you, Mark. This concludes our webinar today. If you'd like to stay on, you can still type in questions. Our presenters are going to hang out for a few more minutes to answer any questions that come up. Thank you all for attending.
Everybody have a great week. Thank you.